everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transportation. It has been a while, I guess 2.5 weeks. I am slightly injured. A week and a half I fell. I had a walking accident. I'm not sure what exactly happened. I tripped on something. Cars were not involved. And I hurt my right big toe and my left arm, which means I can't fully, or rather, I can do this, I can fully lift my right arm if I'm using my left hand to feel. Like, it's not a bone issue, it's a muscle issue. But I have less than perfect range of motion, which I mostly use as cope to keep playing the same video game things over and over just to time myself, just to see how fast I can do it. At this point I'm doing it at my normal speed. Like the final mission of StarCraft 1, like of Brood War, I do in about 23-24 minutes, which is my usual timing. Yeah, I hope I get better soon too. I'm already getting better. The reason I didn't stream a week ago was I was in excruciating pain, and then on Tuesday I had the conflict. So here I am now. And so, anyway, I want to talk a little bit about construction costs. Yeah, that too, yeah. It's, especially now that it's wintertime, right? In wintertime it's a difference of 6 hours, right? And then it's 5 hours when we're in summertime. So it's midnight, our summer, 1 in the morning, when it's our winter. Yeah, no, as I said, I'm getting better. It takes a lot of time to heal. Like it's a tendon thing, or a ligament, but anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about construction costs. Everyone in my orbit, except me, is celebrating something, and I'm gonna see if I can find this. 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2 Station Redesign. Let's see if I can find that. This is very recent news, like maybe a week or two ago. No, it's not, it would not be this. Station size reduction, maybe? Maybe, I'm unsure. AM New York, actually. Oh, right, I can't read AM New York here. Okay, I don't... Okay, so they talk about this a little bit. I don't know to what extent they're saying this explicitly, but maybe it's a New York Post thing. Let's see if I can find it in the Post. But the point is that okay then. This. Yeah, I got it. Okay, so what's been going on is that the MTA is low-key doing something that we're telling them to do, which is to shrink the station footprint. So the plan was to build about twice as big as they needed, and at this point it's and at this point they are cutting that to, I think, about 50% more. I don't know if there are pictures here. Okay, there aren't. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm just going to use words, not pictures. The stations are, instead of being about twice as long as they need to be, they're going to be about 50% longer, so a half measure, if you will. But half measures are, halfway between current practice and actually being good. So overall it's good news. People, again, Eric is very excited about it. People in our general policy Orbit are very excited about this. It's like the transit cost project identified something and they're getting results. And I'm actually kind of pessimistic. And I want to explain why I'm pessimistic. Because it matters for a lot of other reactive cost savings. And the issue is that, and again, it's not even a kind of broad MTA is incompetent claim. I mean, I think it's true, but that's not pertinent. Rather, what's pertinent is that they have so they're saying that the price tag is being reduced from 6.9 to 6.6. Now, the way I mock it, I need to explain how I'm mocking it. It's they're reducing the cost by 1 billion from 6 billion to 6 billion. So 6 minus 1 equals 6. And this is a calculation not for this project, which here they're only claiming 300 million, not 1 billion. And they're claiming a specific cost reduction, which is good. But this is for a different project, which is called the Douglas Tunnel at this point. It was for many years called the Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel Replacement, BNP Tunnel Replacement. Now, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned the BNP tunnels many times. In the 2000s, among the rail fans in the northeastern United States, of whom I was one. I lived in New York at the time. This was considered the most important physical construction project between New York and Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, cost overruns made it no longer great, but they still continued with it, and even gave it the name of a civil rights hero, or in this case, not civil rights, abolition, Frederick Douglass. Usually when I think of civil rights heroes, I think of 1950s, 60s, 70s advocacy. Someone like Frederick Douglass, I think most people would just call an abolitionist. But anyway, so for people who don't know the history, Baltimore, so the northeastern United States generally does not have much of a coastal plain. This is more of a southern thing. So this is very flat. Usually when the cities start is when it stops being flat, because all of these cities are located at the falls of each river. So where the river stops being navigable by, I guess maybe 18th century or maybe early 19th century ocean-going ships. So where people change from ocean-going ships to riverboats, there would be cities. So, for example, Richmond is such a city. And Washington is kind of such a city. Technically, the falls are in Georgetown, so Georgetown was the fall line city, and then the capital of the United States was built right nearby. So, kind of east and southeast of that, you do get flat expanses to some extent, but the point is that the farther north you go, the less of a coastal plain you have, and in Baltimore, the extent of the coastal plain is basically this. So basically, anything that was flat and easy to build railroads in was already being urbanized by the 1850s and 60s. In the Civil War, there was no route through Baltimore. Trains had to be carried. There were railroads through Baltimore, but they were on the street and carried by horses, so very slow. Baltimore was a pro-Confederacy city. It was Maryland had to be occupied by federal troops just to make sure that DC would not be surrounded by the Confederacy. And so Union troops had to guard trains, had to escort trains as they were going through Baltimore. The Transcontinental Railway was completed before the routes through Baltimore were completed. So there were two railroads, the Pennsylvania and the Baltimore and Ohio. The Pennsylvania Railroad built this route. The Baltimore and Ohio built this route. I forget what this one is called. Maybe I forget what this. Maybe the Camden Tunnel. Maybe the Camden Tunnel. This is called the Union Tunnel, like east of Baltimore Penn Station. Then west of Baltimore Penn Station, it's called the Baltimore and Potomac, BNP. So very. So this is 1860s, 1870s engineering, but very compromised because ground is kind of terrible for this. They had to do a lot of tunneling. The United States was never much of a tunnel building society. It has atypically little rail tunneling as well as atypically little road tunneling. It would prefer to climb mountains, for example, using very tight curves and switchbacks. And because there were two railroads that were competing rather than cooperating, the tunnel designs were further compromised because the same budget was divided by two different railroads rather than one railroad building some kind of union station with unified approach, and then each railroad going its separate way from there. So so these tunnels are just trash. Tight curves, low construction standards leading to very high maintenance costs. The BNP tunnels leak water. So replacing them, something called the Great Circle Tunnel has been mauled for, I think, 15 years maybe. And again, in the late 2000s, it was budgeted at the time 700, I think, or 750 million, so in today's money about $1 billion. $1 billion for this is kind of expensive, but it's not truly $1 billion because it's $1 billion minus the net present value of the reduced maintenance costs, which is real. So I guess high hundreds of millions. And this was said to save high-speed trains 2.5 minutes. So several hundred, so let's say $1 billion minus maintenance costs for 2.5 minutes. That's not terrible on the margin. There are cheaper ways to save minutes on the Northeast Corridor, but $1 billion for 2.5 minutes is not terrible. Again, on the margin. And then the billion turned to $6 billion through explosion in scope. Essentially, because this was treated as such an important thing, everyone added more and more scope to it. So instead of a 2-track tunnel, it became 4 tracks. The 4 tracks then turned into large tubes, like 4 tubes, so 4 single-track bores, each of which became much larger to allow for double-stacked freight and mechanical ventilation. And eventually they de-scoped that back to 2 tracks, no freight, just passenger trains, just electric passenger trains, but somehow the cost remained sticky. So when they did all that de-scoping, they said that it's going to save $1 billion out of the 6, and it ended up being 6 minus 1 equals 6. Essentially, the de-scoping is something that is only really considered when the project is in such a poor management state, such a poor state with overruns or projected overruns, that when you're being this reactive, essentially all it does is it cancels future cost overruns. Because once the number, in this case 6, is out there, it'll be done for 6. I mean, if you could do it for 5 random local actors that demand betterments will say, well, now you have money for betterments. So essentially, it's kind of weird incentive where where project-based funding means that any cost saving, once the project has been announced, will go to the stupidest things ever. This was also something that happened with the Green Line extension. They did a lot of cost savings when they redesigned the stations to be smaller, but no, their actual cost did go down essentially because the project was being threatened with cancellation. Yes, when you are in a position where you might actually cancel things, then and only then can you get real cost reductions. But even then, the reduction in scope was large, and and quite a lot of the money ended up being wasted anyway. For example, because the old designs had already been paid for. And with Second Avenue Subway Phase 2, I suspect that is the thing. So again, it's a reactive change, and it's, by the way, doesn't mean it's a bad change, because the extra size of all of these stations, it's useless to passenger. It doesn't reduce operating costs in any way. All it does is it makes it managerially easier to keep different departments separate, with separate break rooms for each group of crew. So it's not something that, again, it's not something that it's not something that simplifies maintenance, for example. So if you're spending more money now to reduce maintenance costs in the future, okay, that's legit. But that's not what's happening. Essentially, money is being spent to avoid reforming management. But reforming management is annoying, but it's not something that costs significant amounts of money. Usually, it saves money because you identify and eliminate uh, operational waste elsewhere. Maybe you reduce the number of managers per line employee. I don't know what the numbers are and how they compare what they should be for operations, but in construction, we got numbers for the Green Line extension, and it is way too many supervisors on way too few construction workers, or rather, the number of construction workers was not too low. I don't know if it was too high. It was either what it should have been or too high. In New York, I know it was too high. But the number of people managing them was clearly too high. The ratio was one white collar supervisor per, I think, 1.8. Yeah, I think per 1.8 blue collar skilled workers in the private sector in New England for that kind of construction. It's not one in 1.9, but 1 in 3. And because the white collar supervisors earn more, it's a big change in cost. I mean, if we're pretending the blue collar workers are free, which they're not, it's an increase of what is it? 3 divided by 1.9. It's an increase in 2/3 in the labor cost. Again, it's actually a much smaller increase because the blue collar workers are not, in fact, free. But if you're pretending white and blue collar workers earn the same, then it is what? For 3 workers instead of 1, it's this. Okay, so it's this ratio. Again, so 17% doesn't look terrible, but remember that the extra workers are getting paid a lot more. So if the extra workers are getting paid twice as much, suddenly we're doing something like this, and it's not a big factor, but it starts looking more and more substantial the higher the white collar workers get paid. And this is the United States. It's a place with very high managerial wages. So generally, from everything else that I know about subway maintenance in New York certainly, but probably also US-wide, given the problems that they're having in Boston, it's likely that there's a lot of excessive managerial headcount. So if anything, avoiding managerial reforms, avoiding organizational reforms through creating more space saves negative amount of money because it gives bad management an excuse to stay bad. And so overall, the point is that the reduction in scope, it's not a reduction from here. This is what they intended to do in the 70s, and this is what they intended to do in the 2000s, and instead they're doing maybe half as much, like this to this. So the smaller size of the station means less waste. But my suspicion is that the waste is going to go to other waste. And then the question is, but this is a short-term question. Remember, the project is fully funded. The Fed's fully funded Second Avenue Subway Phase 2, which means that it's been declared that there's money for this. So any further cost reductions, again, they cannot really be used to build other lines. The United States has project-based funding for the most part, and I'm going to go into the LA exception in a little bit for why that's not. It's clearly not just a matter of project-based funding. The point is that LA doesn't have that. But the point is that the project-based funding means that they can't, let's say, build IBX or parts of IBX from the savings. They can build things related to Second Avenue Subway Phase 2. There's actually one good thing that they could do from it. So to give credit where due. There are some plans to keep tunneling from here all the way to the end of 125th Street. I think I've seen the number $400 million for doing that. so that in the future they could build stations here, here, and here at the intersections with the north-south subway lines and build a new line. Now, Kathy Hochul did suggest that as a thing that could be done. So, Kathy Hochul, 125th Street subway. The cost was not showing any signs of reduction. Yeah, 7.6. Hochul eyes 7.6 billion New York City subway extension along 125th Street. I'm not gonna look at the rest of the article. I don't think it's terribly important. So, starting from where 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2 ends, which is about Park, the extension would go until maybe Broadway or a little past Broadway. So it's kind of weird. Like if you're, this is by the way where long-term planning matters. If the long-term planning is there's no commuter line here, then you want to build a station between Broadway, maybe with one exit on this side of Broadway, and Amsterdam, because this area is not that developed. Like, there isn't that much around here. So Amsterdam is actually much more of a neighborhood center for this kind of for this part of West Holland. And now there's the Columbia expansion here, so maybe you do want to drag it a little bit farther, with just maybe an exit on this side of the street or this side of the L, but it's not that important to go beyond. But if there's a commuter train here, then you want to go here and then have one exit at Broadway, possibly on the east side of the L, and then the other should hit here because there should be a commuter station here. So this is where actually having some kind of long-term planning matters. And ideally, you would also want to have an access that doesn't require people to walk underneath the Riverside viaduct. Although, to be fair, I mean, this viaduct, because it's a normal street, not a freeway, the cars here are not that fast, so it's annoying, but it's not as noisy as walking underneath this, for example, even though this is, you might be able to tell that with the 3D, this is actually higher above ground level than us, because the freeway is normally adjacent to the river, or just above the river, rather, whereas Riverside is top of the hill here, so suddenly it's a bridge over 125th. So anyway, if you take the longer route of the longer length of this is 2.4, what did we say it was? 7.6? Yeah. 7.6 divided by 2.4 is more than $3 billion a kilometer, even if you assume future inflation. It's a higher cost per kilometer substantially than 2nd Avenue Subway phases 1 and 2. Now, in some way this is more complicated because the stations likely need to be mined because the tunnel will have to go underneath all these north-south subways. But first of all, this station doesn't need to be mined. You can absolutely cut and cover it between here and here, and then and if it's that much of a problem to build, then you can absolutely cut and cover, and then tell people to cross this and this underneath the viaduct, and it's okay. I mean, not the best, but if it's a big cost difference, then fucking do it. But to be clear, this is a difficult station to build. This is a difficult station to build, and yet this is a more difficult station to build, and yet they're doing it. 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 1, the stations were not difficult to build, but they essentially decided to go on a challenge run and mine them anyway. So so as that baseline, it shouldn't be. So if that's the baseline, it shouldn't be more expensive, and yet it is. And so, now bear in mind, the cost saving on 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 2 was announced after the 125th Street trial balloon. So the 125th Street trial balloon, what I expect to see is people walking back 7.6 and saying that with these cost savings that they found from Phase 2, building smaller stations without the excessive building smaller stations without the break rooms, without each department having a separate break room on the sides of the cavern, like front and back, as opposed to building some joint break rooms in the mezzanine, then this should substantially reduce the cost of 125th, especially precisely because these have to be mine stations. 125th Street subway construction would be dominated by stations. Again, this has also been the case in Second Avenue subway so far, but that's because Phase 1 was a challenge run. Phase 2 is in different ways a challenge run, by which I mean they were planning on building caverns at 106th and 116th Streets, and then sanity prevailed and they redesigned, but at least some of the design work budget did go to looking at excessive sized stations. So the upshot is that, and again, with 125th Street, some of that is unavoidable. Now, I emphasize some. Mine stations are probably unavoidable here and here, possibly here, but maybe not. But excessive size is not is absolutely avoidable. Way too many supervisors in the tunnel, avoidable. Non-standardized systems, avoidable. Bad procurement, consultants, supervising consultants, absolutely avoidable. The state government can hire an in-house team with a track record of building this, and yes, this means the in-house team will be led by someone who speaks English with an accent. Yeah, these are the people who successfully build tunnels. They're not native English speakers, that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, what people care about is results. I mean, maybe the people who whisper in the New York governor's ear don't care about results because it's the New York state government, but fundamentally, the people who are being governed, people who make decisions, the informal decisions about, let's say, who gets to ascend to higher office, they care about results. It's fine, and so the upshot is that this shrinkage dramatically reduced the cost of 125th Street subway construction, and yet, again, I'm not saying it hasn't because the announcement was before that, but they should presumably announce that this is reducing the cost of 125th Street construction. It's something that the governor seems to care about in the future. So, okay, here's an example of how it's going to actually reduce the cost of something where they don't have the money in the bank already. Second Avenue subway, remember, has money already. 125th Street, nope. So this is where the cost reductions matter the most. So again, this is what we will see, but I'm pessimistic. Is this a smoke screen for other cost increases? I don't think it's a smoke screen. I think it's a way of being defensive against future cost increases. So cost increases that are not clear but may happen. And remember, every cent of the budget is spent. And I'm not saying has been spent, I'm saying is spent. I'm saying that if there's a little bit of excess in the budget, it's trivially easy to do a betterment or to be lazy about some kind of construction technique that's too expensive but looks fancy. Again, it never looks nice to passengers. That's not what the money's being spent on. Or restriction of hours of service. The city council in New York is incredibly efficient at extracting value. Often to the point that if you want a real cost overrun, you need to a real cost saving. You need to actually seriously dangle cancellation in front of things, which is what was done in Boston with the JLX. Could the presence of the fault line be to blame for higher costs? I don't think so. I mean, clearly at some level that matters, but also Italian construction costs aren't high. Japanese ones, I mean, they're higher than in Italy. They're not higher than in the English-speaking world. At some point, it's not about geology. I don't think geology matters at the level that is visible in our database. It's visible if you very, very carefully control for things, but the dominant factors are not geology. It's kind of remarkable how we have not found any big influence of geology on projects. So we've never, for example, been told that, let's say, Second Avenue Subway Phase 1, yes, was an unusually difficult project due to its geology. The projects where we hear the worst things about geology tend not to be especially expensive. Things like Marmarai, and my suspicion is that it's actually related, not in the sense that if the geology is objectively worse and the costs are lower, but rather good government comes from empowering the professionals, so it would be the geologists, the architects, the engineers, the planners, and so when these people are in charge, and this is essentially the situation in Southern Europe, I think in Turkey, to some extent in Scandinavia, they talk about that. So they talk about, so this is why people in Stockholm talk to me about grouting. And the papers that I was reading about the engineering of the T-bana, we're talking about ground conditions. We're talking about the ground. So bear in mind the ground conditions in Stockholm are excellent because it's very hard rock, so it forms a natural arch. Very easy to mine, and yeah, mining is more expensive than undercover. But when everything else is good, that's okay. And the mining is again cheaper just because you usually don't need to ground. And again, natural arch, so you don't need lining. So I bring this up because it means that so it means that when I was looking at the construction of Udenplan of the station on the commuter train, I was essentially reading what the professionals said. And when Elif was talking to people about Marmarai, she was hearing from professionals. And then when we talk to people in New York, yeah, we talk to professionals, but the kind of narrative, if that makes sense, is not dominated by the professionals. It's dominated by the political appointees and their advisors, who have heard of geology and have heard of engineering. And it's just profoundly different. So they don't think very much about the geology because that's not something they consider important. They talk about, and it was kind of remarkable how talking to how when we talked with the most important people on these projects in the United States, we never hear anything technical. It's never about anything technical. It's always it's people who are bored by technical discussions and instead are passionate talking. And I'm saying, and don't just mean construction laws, I'm saying in general, even operational things in the United States. These are people who are bored by technical discussions of, signaling or any kind of design questions, but their eyes light up when they talk about the different groups that engage in extraction or in obstruction in city politics. It's what they care about. And so again, we haven't heard of geology as well, but also we haven't heard of that very much talking to the professional. I hope that makes sense. Now, some of it is brought. Now, there is a solution to much of this, which is eliminate the concept of project-based funding. The feds should not fund specific projects except if they have full control, or substantial control at least. They should be funding agencies, and then an agency that does a good job gets more funding, and an agency that doesn't gets defunded. That's the way it works. And by the way, a senator has a sob story. Doesn't matter actually that much. People have this mentality that certain things have to be funded because of some member of Congress. It doesn't actually matter. You can overrule them, and then they complain a little bit, and then nothing happens. It's not actual power. It's much more norms of bad governance in the United States and actual rules that force bad governance, or any kind of real power that forces bad governance. It's just that Americans, again, just are used to the government sucking, and then they don't expect better. And so anyway, with so to be clear, when I'm saying funding agencies and not projects is helpful, it is helpful, but let's not kid ourselves. This is the thing, because on the West Coast, um, the norm of funding things via sales tax referendums actually funds agencies and on project. So whether this works is uh, in California or in Washington, the state, not the city is, um, they have to go to ballot on things, and then so in California, for example, they go into ballot on specific sales taxes at specific levels. So that means that there's a specific amount of money, and then they say in the sales tax ballot prop what it's going to be spent on, but that's not legally binding. Like they don't have to cancel the project and return the money if the money turns out to be insufficient due to a cost overrun. Then they just build more slowly. This is the situation in Los Angeles where they have this list of projects which mostly suck. Different from New York. In New York, I mean, the stuff that Kathy Hochul seems to care about, so IBX and 125th Street, probably is the right set of priorities. New York just can't build, and Hochul herself seems indifferent to making sure New York can build. But in Los Angeles, specifically, the priorities suck. Like the stuff that they're building is just not what they is just the wrong project in the wrong part of town, things like that. And so so they have this list of projects that I believe is committed through 2060, and somehow misses important things like South Vermont. So, busiest bus corridor in LA is Wilshire. And it's actually partly a subway, and then the rest is being built as a subway all the way to UCLA and the VA hospital. Original plans to keep going as far as Santa Monica have gone haywire, I think, due to excessive costs. So, but still, they're actually subwaying it. The second busiest bus corridor in LA is Vermont. This is Vermont Avenue. Is it Boulevard or Avenue? I just know the name of the street is Vermont. I'm forgetting what the title of the street is. And okay, you're showing me it in yellow. You're not showing me what the name is. Vermont Avenue. Okay. So again, this is partly a subway as well, north of Wilshire. I never remember the name of the line today. I just remember it by the old color scheme. This was the red line. Like this. I mean, it still goes like it, just has a different name, maybe B or C or something. I'm forgetting. And then, so the idea of South Vermont is instead of having one line with two branches, the line just goes east-west, and then north-south is a separate line that keeps going as a subway on Vermont. Again, second busiest bus corridor in the city, and then you go as far south as you want. There's high job density all the way south to San Pedro. And not only is this the second busiest, the third busiest is a mile west. It is closely parallel on Western. So again, very high priority, I think, but that's somehow not being subwayed in the plan that's committed through 2060. And what this means is that if they have cost savings on the other lines, they could build that. Again, it's not project-based funding. There's a long list of corridors that they're eligible. And this could be fine if everything costs less, but evidently in LA the costs are not getting better. I know they're interested in saving money, but at least so far they haven't been able to do it. So the construction costs, even in an environment where there's more of an incentive for that, because the money will genuinely not be wasted if they can cut the cost of things by, let's say, 20% or whatever, because they can just straight out just build more things from the list. They can build things faster. So they can sell it to the public as a good thing much more readily, as opposed to just good government. And yet, even then, it's not on. So even though I think funding agencies and projects is good, it's not the only thing that matters, isn't it? On the level of like setting the right incentives or whatever abstract shit that you say to avoid having to make concrete plans, because concrete plans are made by professionals, and the American way of governance is that the professionals need to lower their gaze in the presence of a generalist political appointee who probably failed math if they ever took it beyond high school. I mean, like, people are probably overachievers who didn't literally get an F, but I mean, B is, it's pretty shameful at that level. So anyway, that's my pessimism about something that everyone else, I mean, Eric is optimistic, a lot of our, I don't know if backers is the right word, like, all the people who have been pushing for us for rising cost projects are like viewing it as like a big success. Again, I hope that it is, but I mean, I trust Eric on this, and I trust many of these other people. I just am more pessimistic just because of the Douglas Tunnel issue, where 6 minus 1 ended up being 6, and the specifics of project-based funding, which again, it's a New York specific. The West Coast is different. That said, the agency, I guess the problem with agency-based funding is that, at least in the case of LA, I think also in San Diego, I think also in Seattle, but I'm less certain, I don't know it as well. It just means that the list of projects itself gets so politicized through the process of the referendum, because they have to say what to do in the referendum, and they specifically bite off groups to the point that this is related to the horrific project prioritization in Southern California. Again, maybe they do it, maybe that's also a problem in Seattle, maybe it's not, I'm less familiar with it. San Francisco has better project prioritization than LA at this point. Historically it didn't, by which I mean they built the Central Subway and they built Berkeley Airport, both of which we'll all know. But right now they're poking at things like the downtown extension of Caltrain, second Transbay Tube, so the sort of stuff that is great and would be great if San Francisco were capable of building, but it can't. We're talking $3-4 billion a kilometer as opposed to 300 million. And the upshot of all of that is that, again, it's so anyway. So keep talking about San Francisco. So in San Francisco, again, the project prioritization is not terrible at this point. After it was terrible, let's say 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but also they don't, like, I don't think they have these specific ballot props for specific big things like second Transbay Tube. I guess I think the issue is maybe the ballot prop has to be county based, if I remember correctly. I don't remember. Please don't quote me on San Francisco ballot prop processes. This is not the thing I understand the best. It's also incredibly convoluted, the California ballot process. Whereas I guess in LA and San Diego, I've talked to enough people there, what the problems were there. But anyway, so that's, I guess, the tension between project-based funding and agency-based funding, where the funding may be agency-based, but then the list of projects, the trade-off, at least in LA, is the list of projects is just garbage. And then probably what you want is agency-based funding, but also agencies that can internally decide what to spend things on and not have to deal with referendums. It's actually remarkable how in places that build, the project prioritization is not especially politicized. In Vancouver it was, and that's, I think, their Achilles heel, the stuff that made them much less capable of building than they were 20 years ago. In Berlin, we're seeing politicization, and that it was all negotiations between different political parties and like local. By local, I mean within the boroughs of Berlin. Berlin is divided into 12 boroughs, which don't quite correspond to neighborhoods. Sometimes some of these boroughs are named after a neighborhood, but they encompass much more. And but these are the sub-city levels of government. And so anyway, because of so for example, Reinickendorf is one of these, and that's where That's a borough that U8 extension to Märkisches Viertel would be in. So they want it, but the politicking in the previous administration led to that not being prioritized, and other things were prioritized. And now with the new administration, a different set of things is technically prioritized, but also not building, because the politicization means that things actually get cancelled, and there's no, and not cancelled for cost. Just a politician arbitrarily declares something no longer important. So obviously the professionals aren't going to spend as much effort on something that can be like ended on someone else's whim, and the result is that Berlin doesn't build. Berlin, it's kind of weird. Berlin can build, it just chooses not to. Is the distinction that I give with, let's say, New York, which can't build. It also kind of doesn't want to, but it doesn't matter, but because it can't. LA very strongly wants to build, it can't. In California, you can force agency consolidation, but that's not the problem in LA. In LA, the problem is not that the agencies are insufficiently consolidated. To the contrary, they have consolidation at the level of LA County. So they're actually pretty good consolidation in LA. And yeah, it's not consolidated with Orange County or with the Inland Empire, but have you seen the Inland Empire or Orange County? The problem in LA is that extra taxes have to be approved by a 2/3 majority in a referendum. Los Angeles is pretty liberal, but it's not that liberal. If you just say, hi, this is for climate and it's for climate and for a nice city, and we like big government, you're gonna get a majority, you're not gonna get 2/3. So you need to buy off apolitical, like, I'm not going to say apolitical, maybe non-ideological interest groups. And non-ideological interest groups are the worst because they're not quite corrupt, but they're clientelist to an extreme extent. And that's where they essentially bribe local, not even local governments, because it's not things with the status of a local government usually. LA is way too fractionalized for that. So, as I said, in LA there's consolidation in the county, but it's not like the county is divided into big municipalities other than LA itself. Now, I say big municipalities, I mean, bear in mind, Long Beach, I think, is the largest, or rather, it's the highest population American city that is a suburb, for certain definitions of suburb. Maybe Fort Worth. Not the primary city in its metropolitan statistical area. I think that would be Fort Worth, but then Long Beach is number 2. And quite a lot of the suburbs are some of the largest in America, but it's still, a couple 100,000. The county is 10 million, so it's not like there is like a specific municipality comprising the entirety of San Gabriel Valley that wants expansion of the Gold Line, or the foothills and more expansion of the Gold Line, or the Valley. These are much more informal units. The Valley, in fact, is part of LA, but it has a very strong sense of its own identity. So the non-ideological power brokers demand things specifically for the Valley. These are not people who ever ride trains. These are people who want to say, I brought pork. So this is where you're getting really bad projects, because you're buying off non-ideological interest groups that are at best uninterested in good government, and more commonly are negatively interested in good government because good government doesn't need them. That's the LA ballot problem. It's not that it's insufficiently consolidated. It's that requiring 2/3 for a tax increase means that you can't just promise good things in general, because they will get the support of, let's say, 55 or 60%, and you need just under 67, and to get to just under 67, you do need to bribe power brokers who are going to withhold their vote from you. Otherwise, they don't care about climate, for example. That's the LA problem. I don't think it's about CEQA. Because if we're talking about project prioritization, that's something that equally So CEQA affects all of California equally, whereas, again, the project prioritization in San Francisco in the last 10 years has not been bad. So yeah, they opened the Central Subway, but that's something that, so it's actually the Central Subway is a really good example of a project that's being pushed by a power broker that's not especially ideological, in this case, Rose Park. Right in front of Versailles, yeah. So it's not supermajority requirement because, again, San Francisco has the same supermajority requirement. The difference is that San Francisco and the Bay Area in general are much more left-wing than Los Angeles. So I don't know how each metro area of the United States voted in 2020 or 2016. I know how they voted in 2008 because at the time this wasn't being mapped elsewhere, so I actually went through voting by county and tallied them together and made a spreadsheet a few computers ago. And because I stared at the spreadsheet enough, I memorized aspects of it. By far, among the, I think it was million plus combined statistical areas, or if there's no combined statistical area, metropolitan statistical area. I think Miami and Phoenix and San Diego were not contained in any CSA. Their the top level thing was MSAs, so I looked at their MSAs, and then I looked at how the vote Obama versus McCain. I think I just looked at the two-party vote, so I ignored third-party voters. By far, among these 50-something million plus metro areas, the most liberal was the Bay Area. It went 75% Obama, 25% McCain. Number two was either Philly or Chicago. I think Philly and Chicago were, maybe Philly, Chicago, and DC were numbers 2, 3, and 4. They were maybe mid-60s. I just don't remember which one. New York was, I think, low 60s. Boston also low 60s. Miami, I think, was about the same, actually. So South Florida. Now, this was South Florida under Obama, who made historic inroads among Cuban voters, and then the same Cuban voters kept voting Obama, and then they voted Clinton, and then they went back to the Republican Party in 2020, many of them. But again, I'm talking about 2008, and the Bay Area did not significantly redshift. So the point is that the Bay Area is incredibly left-wing. Yeah, I mean, San Francisco itself, I think, at some point, I don't remember if in San Francisco itself more people voted for Putin agent number 2 over Putin agent number 1, but in the California recall, I think in San Francisco, Peter Camejo got more votes. U.S. Election Atlas.org. Let's see if they still exist. In 2003, in the election, in the recall, I believe Peter Camejo, I think maybe came third and not second, but he beat the very strong showing Republican. Okay, so actually I'm going to do gubernatorial right now. Gubernatorial by year 2003, and that's just going to be California. By the way, for people who don't know the site uses blue for Republicans and red for Democrats, because I think it predates 2000. In the United States, the colors blue for Democrats, red for Republicans. They're an artifact of the 2000 election. Previously, the colors alternated, I think. And so the person who made this said that he remembers how in '84 people said that America was very blue because in that election apparently Reagan was blue and Mondale was red. So he stuck with that. And then red versus blue states, like red Democrats in blue, Republicans in red, that's specifically an artifact of the Electoral College map in 2000 being blasted on the news for weeks during the Florida recount process. Yeah, so anyway, so San Francisco, yeah, Camejo was third, not second, but the point is that he is ahead of the conservative Republican McClintock, who ran a very strong third in the replacement, and this is how Camejo did in the like statewide. So, so in San Francisco, in the Bay Area in general, they can just say this is for climate, this is for public transportation, we like using big government to solve big problems, and you can get a majority for good things that way, or a two-thirds majority for good things. I mean, not for all of them, because look at how they managed to recall an actually good prosecutor in Chesapeake just because he was trying to prosecute violent crime and not bullshit shoplifting. But I absolutely can see that in suburban Massachusetts. But anyway, so in San Francisco you can you can get two-thirds majorities for big government investments without clientelism. In Los Angeles and in San Diego, you cannot. That's the main thing to note. CEQA doesn't make you prioritize low-quality projects. CEQA might make you prioritize projects that are more locally supported, because then you will not get sued. But even that is not guaranteed, because CEQA, NEPA in general, the American system is adversarial. It's at this point people are calling it the heckler's veto, in which the unhappiest member of the community chooses whether there's a lawsuit, which means that you cannot come to a consensus. You cannot do so. It's not like there's a power broker. So there are these power brokers that I mentioned in the Valley, the ones who led the secession. I think the early 2000s, there was a secession effort where people were in San Fernando Valley were trying to secede from the rest of LA. So these types, or if it's a more formal thing, it would be a borough in New York City. These are people who can demand things by promising to withhold political support. And in the case of LA, you need their support to win two-thirds in a referendum. In the case of New York, I don't think their support matters, but other people informally let them do things, and this is one of the reasons New York City is very poorly governed. And but they cannot guarantee that there will not be lawsuits. They cannot do that. Local actors can still sue. So the preference for stuff that's locally supported is not an artifact of NEPA or CEQA. CEQA is the same heckler's veto as NEPA, but the heckler's veto is more powerful in the sense that under NEPA, it's required for every negative impact to be documented, and the heckler will invent negative impact, and the judge reviewing this does not understand environmental science well enough to be able to laugh someone out of court if they have any budget to say that something is bad for whatever. CEQA is the same, but in CEQA, all of the aforementioned negative impacts have to be mitigated. But it's still executed on the basis of a lawsuit. So this is not why LA has poor project prioritization. CEQA is creating other problems, as is NEPA, but it's not what's leading to poor project prioritization, because local support is not a defense against lawsuits. You need local unanimity, and you're never getting it. And in fact, I will add that if you subscribe to any kind of legal realism, which I do, then you will say that the judges choose whether to let the heckler veto or not. And for things that are actually important to the judges, they will shut down the hecklers. And the example that I keep going to is the route, which I cannot show because it's on an older computer, for California high-speed rail between the Central Valley and the Bay Area. There are two options. So we discussed this before, that Caledosium is at uni right now, and if you're at uni now, it means that you were not participating in the flame wars about it on California high-speed rail blog, which unfortunately has lapsed, is only dead, but the domain itself lapsed and is parked by trolls. Not trolls in the sense of like a commenter as being an asshole. I mean like an actual like domain name squatter. Uh, I discovered this when someone in the comments alerted me to that a few days ago. So there are two ways to get between for high-speed rail to get between the Central Valley, so here, and the Bay Area, here. And it was a big debate among the environmentalists in the mid-2000s, and then a big debate among the rail fans in the late 2000s, early 2010s. This route, where the interstate goes, is called Altamont Pass. I think the pass is here. I think this is the literal pass. It's a low pass. You may be able to say that it's not that mountainous. It required tunneling, but not a lot of tunneling. There would perhaps be more tunneling required here, but again, this is the pass, not this one. Maybe here. And then the idea is you go here, you cross the bay here where it's shallow, and originally this was supposed to be a bridge. There used to be a rail bridge here. It was then set on fire by vandals, and there are conspiracy theories that it was set on fire by people who didn't want Altamont Pass trains to use this route. And then you enter San Francisco from this direction. Alternatively, you can go like this and do a second Transbay tube, but $. And then you go to San Jose on a branch here. That's Altamont, but the other option is Pacheco Pass. It doesn't have a freeway. That's not the problem. It's a new tunnel anyway. The tunnel so the idea is to go like this, and then tunnel here. And then you enter San Jose from the south, and you continue up the route to San Francisco. If you pretend that there's nothing in the Central Valley north of Madera, these routes are probably equal. If you only care about LA to San Francisco. So LA to San Francisco, the timing for Altamont was 2 minutes faster. In theory, it was vulnerable to one thing, and then this is vulnerable to another thing, the schedule, so not that different. Constructability is, on what they thought in the 2000s, probably the same. I think they could have done Altamont for cheaper, but essentially, San Jose power broker Roderick unilaterally decided he likes Pacheco more because it's better. Pacheco is better for LA to San Jose. Altamont is better for Bay Area to Sacramento, and also for LA to Sacramento, because essentially on the same coast, instead of building only up to Chowchilla in the Central Valley, you would build all the way up to Stockton. So getting up to Sacramento from there is essentially free. And then more constructability problems happened with Pacheco, but the decision was made. Now, Pacheco Pass enters the Bay Area from Point South, so here. So it goes up all of Caltrain, which is more difficult to timetable than the Altamont Pass option, which enters the Caltrain corridor to Redwood City, here. And now, the importance of this is that people along the Caltrain corridor immediately south of Redwood City are very wealthy and very NIMBY. And they made up some environmental grounds to sue when the Pacheco decision had been made, and the project won the ballot prop. They wanted to force a very long tunnel or a change to Altamont. These were called Pampa for Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Atherton. Palo Alto, legendarily wealthy. Menlo Park also, that's where Facebook is at this point. Atherton is much smaller, much more exclusive, and much wealthier. They will sue anyone, anything over anything. And as it happened, they had technical merit on their side. They had a smoking gun, but they still lost. Not because the state mollified them in any way, but because California high-speed rail was important to the state, and therefore the state fought back. And I guess the judges didn't want to trollishly destroy a state priority. So it was also a political priority for the state Democratic Party. So that's a kind of legal realist attitude toward lawsuits. This is something where, notably, this was not about like mollifying some NIMBYs so that you can defeat the remainder in court. To the contrary. Pacheco was always the route with the worst NIMBYism, because because this area is environmentally sensitive around Los Banos, and there are developers who really want to develop that, so they had to insert a clause into the California high-speed rail bill that they want to ballot on, saying that it is banned to build a station in Los Banos. So you're not. I think the explicit rule is you're not allowed to build stations between Merced or Fresno and Gilroy. I.e., you're not allowed to build in Los Banos. That was the only way that they could buy the support of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club preferred Altamont. So the typical lawfare organizations already wanted Altamont. So it's not like they were buying off some NIMBYs to be able to defeat the rest. They picked a route for reasons that, if anything, triggered more NIMBYs, just because, again, LA to San Jose looks better under Pacheco, that's all. And then once the project became a kind of symbol of the California Democratic Party, judges appointed by the same party found reasons to unfound the lawsuit. So the point is that it's not CEQA. And I stress this because people, I think, in the United States, and it's something that I think needs more research, which we're going to do eventually, I hope, but but I think people in the United States at this point, I think they're correct that NEPA and CEQA, the American Environmental Law, makes it harder to build green infrastructure, but I think people overrate the impact of that on the construction costs of railways. I mean, there's a real impact there, don't get me wrong, but I think that this impact is lower than many people believe. Like, if you abolish NEPA, you're not going to get back to pre-NEPA construction costs. The construction costs in the United States have exploded for, I think, largely different reasons. Again, not entirely, but largely different reasons. And the issue of the heckler's veto is not by itself a problem of environmental law. It's a problem that interacts very poorly with environmental law, because environmental law is a surface area through which the hecklers can sue and create problems, but the creation of problems is much more, I think, political than legal, and this is why I keep giving the example of LA messing up project prioritization to appease local clientelist actors. So I'm just trying to explain my pessimism about something that basically everyone other than me involved in New York City construction cost discourse is genuinely, and I think to a large extent, understandably excited about. But there's a limit to how excited I can be about something where I'm literally seeing the next tranche of projects, IBX, and especially the straddle balloon for 125th Street subway, which I genuinely hope happens. I just don't see it happening for 7.6. Do it for 700 and then we'll talk. Be 800 and then we'll talk. And I'm not seeing cost figures and that look like it's actually happening, unfortunately. So this is why I'm pessimistic. And it will take questions, and I hope that this is still working with problems that this is showing with the video. Like I think my internet briefly went out, and it's bad at getting back, maybe. So let me know if there are questions, and then we can stop. And I keep noticing that my streams are not as overly long as they used to be. I can't tell if it's because they're becoming tighter or if it's because I have less to say. I'm not sure. Your call. But I will take questions. I don't know if they're hiding stuff. They're clearly not transparent about unit costs. Okay, Kogi, then type in mineral, I'll deal with Sunny. It would be nice if any savings from SAS could go toward eliminating the IBX's street running section. I think that the project-based funding makes that very unlikely. I think the idea is that savings are going to go to continuing the tunnel westward toward Broadway and Riverside, so that in the future this can become the shell of a 125th Street subway, which in this context I don't think is bad. If the tunneling machine that they're getting for a very short section of 125th Street is good for the entire street, just do it. That's scale. That's good. Are they still planning on building more tunnels under the Hudson? If you mean the New Hudson Tunnel, like the Gateway Project, yes, the Gateway Project, in fact, is fully funded. It's in design. I don't think they're physically building the tunnel yet, but they're doing engineering and design on the tunnel. I mean, I'm working on a Northeast Corridor timetable, right? I'm going to very briefly show you an old crayon version of this. Please don't ask specific questions about this, especially not about the some curve radii there, just because we're getting much more accurate information as we speak. But I haven't written up the report. The report is not yet written. And it's not being and it's not being written. Like if I open up Open Office Writer, it's to write World War III reel. It is not to write this report. This report will be written when we're done with the design. But I'm still working on the report, right? So it's the same with the tunnel. It's the same with the tunnel. They're working on building it, but they're not drilling the tunnel yet, but they will. Don't worry. So I mentioned the United States has not learned from Obama-era mistakes. Okay, about how politicians are not caring about any amount of success. Why is this tolerable? Why the people who generally support can tolerate so much failure and get excited. Okay, so why is it? First of all, the politicians take credit for the construction, maybe for completion, not for the aftermath. That's the first thing. The second thing is like the actual users are not the kind of most politically charismatic group. It's a group that's politically important often. For example, business travelers between New York and Washington. Is any of them a swing voter? Probably not. But they're donors. They give money. It's actually important. One of the things that's keeping New York to Washington high-speed rail alive is that politicians use Amtrak between New York and DC a lot, and so do their donors. So it's important to them. But you can't say out loud, "I'm doing this for the donors." So often the subgroups that are viewed as the most important are the ones that are not the users. And it's also for transit riders, but rather the workers, like the construction workers. So that leads to a lot of populism leading to worse construction. There's a very populist aspect of it. Now, I will point out that the subgroup analysis is trash. Now, I haven't wanted to talk about the war on stream ever, but it's actually a really good segue into it, and the segue is that if you look at polling among Americans on the war between Israel and Hamas, and you ask Americans, who do you sympathize with in this war more, Israel or the Palestinians, a very large majority answers Israel. Moreover, the people who answer Israel are more reliable voters than the ones who answer the Palestinians. There's a big age gradient, so it's about 50-50. Not quite 50-50, it's more like 33, because there is both equally. Among young Americans, but younger Americans vote at much lower rates. And my impression is that pro-Palestinian people in the United States are, like, even within age group, just less reliable voters. Often it's bundled in just general mistrust of America. A lot of pro-Palestinian activism, and not even just in the United States, like a lot of pro-Palestinian activism is just kind of like the most reliable way to signal that you're against America. It's kind of this mentality that Israel is like the America that it's okay to hit, not to hit, to hate. So the upshot is that the so if you're Joe Biden and you're trying to, let's ignore what I think Joe Biden should be doing, which is not that different, a little bit different, but not that different from what he actually is doing on this war. I think I'm pretty impressed with what he's doing, but the if you look at polling on this, like what do people think about in the United States? What do they think about the war? What do they think about Joe Biden's handling of the war? He should assume a broadly pro-Israel position. I mean, so, and again, this is broadly what he's been doing. But if you look at subgroups, you can always find subgroups that disagree. And this is where people are starting to discourse about how he's going to have problems with Muslim voters in Michigan. So they find, so on an issue where the American voters, when the American public is probably about 2-1 pro-Israel and the American voters more than 2-1, they found one group of voters in a swing state that atypically goes the other way, and then they keep saying, well, he's going to have problems with Arab voters in Michigan, Biden, for being too pro-Israel, and then people are like kind of overblowing that out of proportion because it's just so much easier to talk about subgroups than to talk about broad trends. This is not just, by the way, Israel-Palestine. I've seen people make the same political argument about, let's say, immigration, or let's say anything else. Instead of just saying, this is popular with the broad public, this is unpopular with the broad public, they constantly they essentially assume everything is secretly 50-50, and then they try to look at which specific subgroups are more for it and which are not. This is just very common, I don't know what to call it, praxis, mentalité in American politics. So it's drilling down to specific subgroups rather than trying to do things that generally work. Again, it's not just infrastructure. It's the people who are doing the politics of everything. I don't think it's clearly it's not affecting Biden's foreign policy toward Israel, but foreign policy has always been kind of siloed away from that kind of politicking in the United States, whereas things like immigration policy are not, and this is how you're getting basically the entire American political punditry looking at these polls that have Americans supporting path to citizenship for immigrants by 3-1 margin, and then looking for excuses why not to do that. Because of some, again, bullshit subgroup analysis. And again, I think it's the same with infrastructure. There's this mentalita that you need to think about subgroups in the United States. And again, it doesn't matter if something broadly works. They will ask about specific subgroups. Again, they can't help themselves. This is how they think, I think, is a big reason. Another is that if you're Buttigieg, for example, and you're building high-speed rail now, it'll open after you're running for president the first time. It's kind of weird actually for Buttigieg, because Buttigieg is young enough that he can run in the 2030s. But probably his best time is going to be 2028. But that requires him to be seen as having been successful by 2028. Big infrastructure projects take too long. I think it's part of it. It's not something that is very friendly to a politician who, even one who has a fairly long view, but not a very long one. Again, there are politicians who I think you could build a career out of this, like Buttigieg, if he actually is willing to wait, or maybe Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, maybe. But it's not normal. You kind of get the kudos for infrastructure around the time it opens, or if you're shepherding it through construction. There's never any kind of follow-up, I think, about how useful it is. People just don't think about that way. Is why the big politicians don't care, and when the big politicians do care, none of them is an engineer. None of their staff. No one of their staff is an engineer. They don't respect the engineers. They think the engineers should lower their gaze in their presence. It's kind of remarkable how the one time the United States accidentally got a good professional civil servant in this direction, Andy Byford, he was being turned into some kind of generic superstar, and then when he was using his professionalism to call for through running, he's been benched by Amtrak over that. And now they're trying to, instead of actually use the professional expertise for this. They're trying to like bullshit something. Um, um, yeah. Bear in mind, sometimes they do learn from mistakes. To be very clear, it's not a general thing Americans don't learn from mistakes because, notably, both the United States and Europe learned from the Great Recession and responded to Corona with a large economic stimulus. Americans are certain, by the way, that Europe didn't do any economic stimulus because they're insane. Is the unemployment rate here still 3? Okay, so this is... It's kind of weird, like they're using a different definition, so let me find the status definition. 3.1 of the labor force were unemployed in December 2023. Yeah, this is the country that Americans keep saying is engaging in too much austerity. 3.1% unemployment, and in the EU, which has Greece and Spain in it, 5.9, which again is not great, but let's compare that with the unemployment in the EU in 2013, shall we? Oh, Malta is 2.4. At this point, why are you doing this to me? At this point, Greece is in the single digits. Spain is almost in the single digits. That's like, I mean, never mind these are, for both countries, post-Great Recession lows. I mean, I think they were about there before the Great Recession. And yeah, France is 7.3%, which is basically a 40-year low. That's not austerity. That's how you react when you learned that austerity is terrible, and to the point that even the worst dickheads at SPD learn not to do it. Steinmeier, by the way, was anti-austerity early. Why do I think it was a result of learning from the Great Recession rather than needing to be supported, being much more sympathetic? Because the support mostly went to marginal workers. Either with the various welfare payments in the United States or the job protection payment in Europe. It's not that everyone lost their jobs. The unemployment rate in the United States in 2020, the peak unemployment in the United States was probably about comparable. In Germany, so in Europe, because they did paycheck, because they subsidized work rather than doing welfare for people who lost their jobs, the unemployment was never as high. But this also means the unemployment was not especially widespread. It was never as high as in the Great Recession. By the way, the American response economically has worked better than the European one. Like the European one has led to lower economic productivity because people didn't change jobs. They didn't change jobs when they needed to, or where they could. But so it's not. And about bootstrap stop being so much Starbucks. I mean, people are absolutely trashing the consumption of the middle class today, or the consumption of young people today. Like it's not a thing. Like it's not. Sorry, it's not. It has not stopped being a thing. It's just. It's like very clear. It's very much a mentality of, oh my god, we need to spend money. It's also very clear what if you look at the EU discourse on this. It was very much okay, we need stimulus. I don't remember what the exact word they used was, but that was what they ended up doing. They made some reassurances to small northern European countries that still find deficits immoral, like Sweden and the Netherlands, and they actually did EU-wide spending. Note, by the way, the EU as an institution is much weaker now than it was in 2008-9. For example, Orban exists now. He did it in 2008-9. Like they were corrupt Eastern European countries now. Not Orban himself, but certainly even like early Orban, like 2010, 2011 Orban was like mildly authoritarian center-right leader before, rather than literally a Putinist agent making things worse. So so EU level action has been more forthcoming. So it's not exactly a matter of sympathy, because sympathy is a matter of political populism, and the EU doesn't do that. Member states do that. It's just the EU internalized the notion that it needed to do some kind of fiscal union. I mean, yeah, there are people who think that, but they're not the people who are in charge. Remember, fucking Steinmeier, who is the most obnoxious SPD moderate, to the point that Ukraine didn't want to even let him into the country because of his past Putinism. Never mind now, in 2013, when he was running for Chancellor, he specifically said that Germany should be more flexible on other. I don't remember if he demanded a higher deficit in Germany, but he said that Germany should be more flexible about other EU members running deficits, and he specifically met with members of Syriza in 2013. 2012, 2013, in the election campaign. So so I'm talking about austerity, the stuff of the like kind of bogeyman of people who throw rocks. I'm talking about like austerity as in like the actual thing of reducing the deficit and raising interest rates as a deflationary policy. Usually with the implication that the austerity is being done in deflationary times like 2009, 2010, 2011. And so that's a real example of learning from mistakes in both the United States and Europe. But with infrastructure, the United States has not learned again. So this needs to be some kind of infrastructure specific thing. Yeah, the United States is on. I think the United States is either on trend line or a little over trend line right now. I think the EU is a little bit below trend line, but it's so different from the double dip of the early 2010s. It's not even funny to compare them. The United States has been doing better economically than the EU in the last couple. If you look at, let's say, 2019 to present day, but the EU has been doing so much better 2019 to 24 than 09 to 14. It's not, again, not even funny. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, people do learn, politicians, political systems do learn from mistakes. This is why I think it's significant that the United States did not learn from mistakes that led to the whiffing of the Obama stimulus. I think the lesson they learned was spend more money on big infrastructure projects. Don't do $8 billion for high-speed rail. Do tens of billions for high-speed rail rather than actually try to get it done. That's I think so that because that's I think the other issue. They learned a lesson. It's not that they didn't learn a lesson. They learned the wrong lesson, if that makes sense. Anyway, does that answer your question? Hikoki. Awesome. Are there other questions? Sure, no problem. Wait, what just happened? Oh, okay. Ooh, go ahead, ask. Not that much of work. Is there a country, sorry, is there a Western country that has done infrastructure well in the last decades or so? Spain is usually the country that gets the most accolades, much more so than Italy. Because, first of all, Spanish construction costs are even lower than Italian ones. And second, Spain just aggressively built. If you want to look at so timelines, Madrid. So Spain just builds much more aggressively. Again, even lower construction costs than Italy. Also, economic growth works differently there. So this is Madrid in 1980. Look how aggressively they've been building just in the last generation. Like their entire lines that didn't exist before, and a bunch of like very big expansion. Like Metro Sur is the one that's very brazen for being in the total boonies, because this 40-kilometer line cost, in today's money, maybe 2 billion euros, 2.5 billion euros maybe. Milan would, why MX? How do you call Milan if not MXB? Milano? Oh, Mil. Yeah, so Milan has built, but it's a smaller network. Anyway, an important difference between Italy and Spain is that Italy, so this looks like great growth compared with this era of stagnation, but this is not great growth actually. Like Italy, prior to the Great Recession, was already the slowest growing developed economy. Spain grew very quickly. You can see how Spain is converging with Italy here, and has kept kind of converging in the sense of having shit growth versus negative growth. And yeah, they diverged with Corona because Spain got hit worse. But the infrastructure construction is up until here, not here, and I guess they're expecting to go back and converge. So the point is that Spain is much more of a newly industrialized country than Italy is. So it's kind of more recent. So they're still in let's build infrastructure mode. So very aggressively building infrastructure. Do I have any work on air envy? No. I can ask John Worth. This is, as far as I can tell, this has a single origin in SNCF in the 1990s, and then it got aggressively exported anywhere that was either imitating France, like Spain, or run by SNCF, like Eurostar. But again, I will ask John Worth, just because the German system is very different. There's no air envy. If anything, in Germany, people think that raising speeds on intercity trains is air envy, which it absolutely is not. It's not EU competition law. Like it's, remember, Germany subject to this in EU competition law. Yeah. MM is a very competent infrastructure procurement organization, but they're not unique. Like that's like a normal European, like a normal first world non-English speaking government bureaucracy. The Madrid Metro is very good. ATP is good at this. There are other things that ATP is not good at, but the part where they're being used as an engineering consultant to smaller cities, that's not just MM in the same country. That's not just MM. That's ATP as well. Does that answer your question? Okay, Munich has built more. Maybe not in the last 20 years, but in the previous 20 years. But still, Germany does not like building very much, which is sad. Like compare Munich in 2000 with Munich in 2020. Then compare Madrid in 2000 with 2020. And this is despite the fact that the Spanish economy since a Great Recession has been garbage. Sure, but that's related to the issues of the Spanish economy versus the Italian one. So which other state-owned enterprise would I say do something similar to MM? Again, MM is not that unique. So RATP is a good one, I think. Again, French construction costs are not that low. French construction costs are medium, not low. But the stuff about having a big in-house engineering firm that hasn't heard that you're supposed to privatize the state because that's what some assholes in London have said. Like, RATP is very good on not listening to assholes in London about that. To the point that with Company Express, actually Company Express is starting to become such an agency. Originally it was a British style single purpose delivery vehicle, SPDV. I never remember if it's special or single, the S, but it's SPDV. And they, so they were designed specifically for that project because it's so big and they didn't want to staff up RATP for it. And that led to a lot of project management failures and large cost overruns, although to levels that are still basically normal French and not the bullshit that you're seeing in Dublin with the Dublin Metro, or British bullshit. RATP. And then Company Express is this. And SPDV is this single purpose or special purpose delivery vehicle. That's a British term. I'm using it by analogy for Company Express. It was done in imitation of Britain because it was a big... So RATP's engineers know well enough to know that you shouldn't act like London, but the French elites, the political elites, generalist elites, France being possibly the most generalist in the outlook of its elite in continental Europe. I think France is much more of a where you went society with university than Germany or Italy or anything like that. It's not as where you went as the United Kingdom or the United States, but it's more like that than Germany, for example. But anyway, so the French elite is seeing a United Kingdom that's broadly about as rich as France. Like maybe the United Kingdom is somewhat poorer, I guess, but London is slightly richer than Paris. The United States is richer than France by virtue of working longer hours, though. But per hour, it's maybe only slightly richer, but higher inequality in London than in Paris. Much higher inequality than in the United States than in France. So if you're an average French person, you don't really gain much from anglicizing, but if you're a French elite, you gain a lot. So you start thinking that the United Kingdom is richer than you are. What I mean by generalist elite, I mean the elite is not... The people who make the biggest decisions on, let's say, big infrastructure are not geologists or engineers or architects or planners or procurement specialists. They're likely, or ethnographers studying who know like what communities need or how to reach communities. They're managers who essentially just learned management. So in the United States, it's often people with a law background or business background or people who have just been in politics their entire life. France has somewhat of that as well. Less so than the United States, but it has that as well. Whereas in Spain, no. In Spain, nobody tells an engineer what to do. So yeah, that's the... so again, RATP is probably easier to imitate just because it's bigger, so more international than MM. France is a more successful country than Italy, so it's probably easier to convince people to be like France and like Italy. I actually don't know the Irish attitudes towards this. In Turkey, for example, one of the things that made them build so inexpensively is that they view Italy as a wealthy country. So they learned. So actually, they used Italian consultants early on in the 1990s, and then but they didn't slavishly follow them. They ended up doing some modifications and improvements, but they actually were willing in the 1990s to learn from Italy, whereas you tell a German that they need to learn anything other than how to make pizza from an Italian, and they will treat you like you have suggested that Germany abolish the constitution. So as we were saying, France, not great corona recovery compared with, let's say, Italy, but pre-corona, France was at peak GDP. Italy, poorer in 2022 than it was in 2007. So, yeah, that's the Italian problem. And so yeah, RATP, Madrid Metro, Trafikverket, it's the traffic administration in Sweden. It's very much a government of doers and not just nutters. Like their construction costs are rapidly rising in the Nordic countries, by which I mean they were hilariously low in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and now they're merely pretty low. No, like I mean the construction costs in Stockholm in the 60s were probably sub-Spanish. Like if Sinn Féin wants to like de-neoliberalize Ireland or something, look to the specifics of how social democratic Sweden was governed in the like at the level of the civil service, 50s, 60s, 70s. Why do Japanese trains? I have no idea. I don't think the trains in Europe screech. If you're asking about Shinkansen, the Shinkansen trains are pressurized, so that they can enter small tunnels without making everyone's ears pop. TGVs are also pressurized, as they understand it. They're not as tightly sealed as Shinkansen trains, but Shinkansen trains have excellent sealing characteristics. This was, I believe, an exact phrase used by either some California high-speed rail memo or a JRTR article that it was quoting. It was 15 years ago, and I mentioned before California high-speed rail blog died, so not easy for me to find right now. On the platform, I have no idea. Yeah, my suspicion is that Ireland's civil service is British. Like Ireland, on so many things, Ireland is like Britain without being Britain. I mean, countries become their oppressors. Like, I mean, it's very common in former British colonies. So Ireland and Ireland is much more ongoing interaction with Britain. Israel, for example, is rather German in many ways, and its rail investment has. If you look closely, you can see the German parts. If you but either way, it's very pan-Western European. In Maghrebi Africa, in the Maghreb, it's basically France, but warmer. I want to say France, but speaks Arabic, but so much of the governance of Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco is done in French and not in Arabic, that they're not exactly Arabic speaking. Like they're much more integrated economically and with infrastructure specifically to France, to the point that Morocco actually has a pretty good high-speed train on the model of the TGV. Like French companies have a long-standing presence, so they know how to deal with let's say the lower labor costs in these countries, lower incomes, as opposed to like presence of big Arab companies, things like Orascom and Bin Laden. Yeah, so the answer is that I don't know. Bear in mind, the United Kingdom was not bad at building infrastructure until I'm going to say neutrally until the 1980s and 90s, because I don't know for a fact that it was because of Margaret Thatcher, even though everything including to some extent specific mechanisms that I've seen, everything is consistent with it's Maggie's fault, but I'm not yet certain. I hope to be certain later this year or next year, but right now I'm not certain. It just is, again, perfectly consistent with Maggie, out, out, out. And I guess Ireland was never social democratic because, like it, because both the main traditional parties are very conservative, and Sinn Féin is not Scotland. Anyway, are there other questions? They kept saying, "Oh, we're not. My videos are not very long anymore. And now we're like an hour 45 of recording." Yeah. I hope to be done at 9. It's 8:55. Sure. Thank you for watching. Thanks for the questions. Sure, thank you for watching. Hikoki. I don't know if the next one will be in 3 days or a week. It should be in 3 days or a week rather than in 2.5 weeks. Like, I mean, unless I fall again. I'm getting better. Like, I mean, I use my hands when I speak. You can see from time to time, and you can also tell by my name and where I'm from that I use something that's not as precise as Italian gesticulation, but there is, Israeli gesticulation. And Israeli gesticulation is not just pointing the gun at a prisoner who happened to live within 100 meters of a terrorist and shooting them. Are there final questions before we break? If not, right, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you again in the next one. And ciao, ciao.